Our final speaker is Biao Xiang. He's a professor of social anthropology at the University of Oxford, specializing in labor, migration, and social change in Asia. And he knows quite a bit about migration as from China, living in Tokyo and commuting to Oxford. He's an ethnographer and has studied migration from rural China to Beijing. Also, migrant Indian information technology engineers in Australia, as well as unskilled labor migration from China to Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. He's author of a number of books. His first one, Transcending Boundaries, first published in the Chinese edition in 2000, and then published in English by Brill in 2005. He's also author of Global Body Shopping in 2007, published by Princeton University Press. He was co-editor of Return, Nationalizing Transnational Mobility in Asia, which was published by Duke in 2013. And the pieces that he had us read will be contributing to his new book, which is forthcoming from Princeton University Press, called The Intermediary Trap. So please join me in welcoming Biao Xiang.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Of course, this year is 2017, and it's a 100th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution, which is probably, I think, an important event in the 20th century. And the importance of this event is, part of that, of course, is to bring the working class, the proletariat, to the front stage of history. But the people who make the working class a really important political category, of course, are not the people from the working class. They are peasants, and they are soldiers, and they were lots of rampant proletarians. And this is so in Russia, in Soviet, and was even particularly so in my country, China. China started proletarian revolution and working class revolution in a time that there were very, very weak working class population. So I think that is of course, this is a classical question within the socialists, among the socialist intellectuals for a long time, where you start the revolution, whether or not as Marx and Engels predicted or started in the places where the working class was most developed, or as Lenin said, you start somewhere in the places that is most backward. But intellectually, I think it's interesting to think that China had this proletarian revolution without much, with a very small proletarian population. And then the subsequent question is what kind of revolution it was and how we should understand the revolution, and especially how we should understand the legacy of the revolution today. And I mention this is because now we have a new concept contributed by Guy, the proletariat. I think the concept, if you look at its mobilizing effect, the mobilizational power, the concept of proletariat is almost as powerful as proletarian. Of course, how far it will go, we have to wait and see. But in the last decades, probably this is the most powerful concept from social sciences that have such an important impact in real life, in social struggle. So therefore, I think it's a very important concept to discuss. Part of the reason is, again, there's an important lesson that we can learn from the history of the concept of proletarian. As I said, empirically, we didn't have a big proletarian population in China, but we succeeded a proletarian revolution. And this actually means, a concept, a useful concept, a powerful concept does not have to have a very strict empirical basis, right? As a guy said, concept sometimes is served as a vanguard mobilizing tool, because an important concept, if it somehow captures the structure of feeling, of the population, it will construct a new reality. It does not have to reflect the given, the existing reality. And this is a very important element of a revolution. Revolution is not to reflect the demand that already exists. Revolution is to create new demand that is potentially there but not yet articulated. But then again, in Chinese history, we do have some very serious lessons that we should not forget. Because precisely guided by this theory of proletarian revolutions, I think the Chinese revolutionaries, as represented by Mao, ignored, neglected, or misunderstood lots of nuanced reality on the ground, which led to quite disastrous consequences in the name of revolution. So therefore, there is two sides. The concept, the misapplication of the concept of proletarian in China has a wonderful result that they made a successful revolution and really get rid of all these old hierarchies, create a new society, but also has a very serious negative consequences, which is, have been very extensively documented by liberal intellectuals, especially after the Cold War. So I think now the concept of proletariat, I really like the concept, and I think it's so much inside. But in order to avoid the problems that created by our usage of proletarian 1 century ago, probably it is a time to examine more carefully and more empirically how much it is match the reality and what's the gap and etc. So it is with this spirit that I want to make this presentation and in a dialogue with the concept of proletariat and related to this is denizen and citizenship as well. So there is a very large precarious laboring population in China, which is one of the most important consequences of China's development over the last 4 decades since the end of the 1970s. And, experientially, they match the precariat category as described by Guy very well. They don't have job security, they jump from one job to another, and they don't have lasting or stable relations with any institutions. They are very much themselves. They don't have a clear life trajectory, and especially don't have a clear life identity, identity about themselves. And their life is all about monetary transactions, because whatever you want, you have to pay for it, out of pocket, because you don't have any institutional backup, right? So therefore, the life is full of anxieties. And these people, the precarious, in Chinese, there is no, it is a very heterogeneous group. So therefore, there is no single word that really describes them very neatly. And the term that is used to refer to this type of people in Chinese is 社会上的人. Those who are in society, meaning the people who don't have very stable job, don't have a clear institutional attachment, 社会上的. So a mother may warn the daughter, how dare you to date a guy on the society, okay, in the society, 跟社会上的, 在社会上的. So I will use this concept. I call them the society people as a Chinese precariat. That's again is a very interesting twist here already. The liberal intellectuals really celebrate or call for the development of civil society in China. And actually, the Chinese society is really growing very fast. In the Chinese language, as used by the ordinary people, the notion of society means something precarious, something slightly dangerous, something that one should avoid. It's not something you should jump into it, right? So 社会上的人 means someone are unreliable, not trustworthy, and certainly a bit low. This is a concept of society in the Chinese mind, which is not necessarily a legacy of communist control. I mean, there is a longer history of this imagination of the Mingjian domain, the unofficial domain, is always kind of feel very foggy and problematic. And this society people include a number of subgroups. Number one, of course, rural-urban migrants. And I really want to emphasize that the factory workers actually are only a small part of these rural-urban migrants. When we think of rural-urban migrants, all these books and documentaries about these 打工仔, the people, 打工妹, who are working in factories in Foxconn and all this, actually they are less than 30% of rural-urban migrants at one particular time, and the majority of rural urban migrants are working in service industries, or they are self-employed. And more importantly, all of migrant factory workers will stop working in factories after a while, because their goal is precisely to move away from factory workers and to run their own little business, and etc. So this factory worker, this image is actually very, very partial. Is a very partial, is only a small part of rural urban migrants. And the second group, of course, the laid-off workers, is about 80 million in total in the city, mainly from SOEs. And the third group is actually what I focus on in my migration project, is the children of rural urban migrants, of laid-off workers, as well as peasants. And these children, their living conditions are much better than the parents, but still the job is very insecure and the life prospects is far from clear. So it's in a precarious position. And then the fourth group are college graduates, so they are the so-called Yizu, the ant tribe, etc. So there's more kind of new terms now coming just over last years about the specific type of precarious people, like a 创客, the entrepreneurial passenger, basically. It means the trunk. It means who are technological savvy and kind of startups, but again in a very precarious position. Their trunk, but it's very much encouraged by the government as a way to address, the employment problem for college graduates. So they launched a campaign called mass entrepreneurship, mass innovation. So the people who really can start up a small business, they're called 创客, the innovation or entrepreneur passenger, the 客, guest or passenger. So this word itself is very transient and really highlights the transient quality of that kind of existence. And these people, I think, this society people has two kind of characteristics if we try to locate their position in the current development model in China. On one hand, they are very marginal. I mean, they are marginal because they don't have voice, they don't have organizations, and they don't have representatives. And also they don't have money. But they are very marginal also because they mainly work in unstrategic economic sectors, services and very traditional manufacturing sectors, as well as lots of factories that the Chinese government is very keen to shut down because of the problem of overcapacity, right? So this is since last year. There's a huge campaign again to cut down the excessive reproduction capacity, because overcapacity means energy, excessive energy consumption, etc. This means their industrial actions, they launch a strike and etc., have very little impacts on the system. Because the government is very happy to shut down all these factories. And so their work is regarded as something replaceable And these people are mainly regarded as a part of the social problems that need a solution rather than a productive labor force. So they are very marginal in this sense. But on the other hand, of course, they are as a population, I think they are foundational. They are foundational. Because in the end of the day, it is they who made China the factory of the work, the factory of the world, and also they are the main part of Chinese consumers, which is the Chinese market, the huge thing. The Chinese market is based on, and without their work and the consumptions, the people on the top just cannot, extract any value. And more importantly, of course, these people, though they are politically unorganized, but they are socially very volatile. These people, they don't have money, but they are extraordinarily rich in information because they are isolated, lonely, and they spend all their time online. So whatever happened, in 30 kilometers away, there is some collective actions, or they will run there straight away, just for fun, without knowing what happened. Very quickly, some collective actions can take place without any warning, without any signals. So the government is very much worried about them in this respect. So they are kind of scattered sand. But this is the scattered sand based on which the Chinese, development model is based on. So that, I think, makes them quite an interesting population to observe. So far they look like a precariat in the West, but they are different from the precariat as at least described in Guy's book in two ways, which I want to emphasize. Number one, as Guy mentioned, the precariat are being turned from citizens to denizens, right? Because there is a withdrawal of social state welfare and there's a cutting down of rights. In China, probably the trend is the opposite. Especially since 2003, there is actually very significant extension of social and economic rights to our citizens. And actually migrant workers, rural urban migrant workers are very important target group for the state to extend all these rights. I have here the full list of, the minimum livelihood assistance and the medical care, pension, work-related injury, and I think there's about 5 or 6 rights. And the most, I have all these figures here, and just to give you one example, which is the medical care. Medical care, kind of universal medical care scheme was introduced in 1999. And at that time, medical care covered only so medical care covered 18 million people in 1999. And by the end of 2015, more than 13 billion people are covered by medical insurance. So more than 95% of Chinese population are under medical insurance. And of course, the medical insurance, there are three types, and then they are differentiated. And it's true, if you are rural population or rural urban migrants, your entitlement is not as good as the person who are in big cities. And the justification was that the medical cost in big cities is much higher than the medical care cost in the countryside, etc. There is unfairness within the system, but I think that is quite a remarkable achievement. And the pension coverage is also, all this actually expand is all by 10%, almost by 10 times in every type of insurance and welfare. And also like a minimum wage which was not introduced until 2000s in many cities. But between, I think, somehow, it's all waves. In China, things all happen in waves. Like between 2007 and 2010, the minimum wage in many cities doubled. It's double. It's increased by more than 100%, especially in Shenzhen and Shanghai. So that was a very impressive improvement. But here, of course, I have to emphasize that the minimum wage, the absolute level of minimum wage increased dramatically. However, the total wage, the proportion of total wage to the total output of the industry or to the total GDP actually still declining. So therefore, what this means is the labor, especially the precarious workers, now are being identified as important subject of governance, as a deserving recipient of basic welfare. But certainly, they are not the main beneficiaries of the development, because they don't have the political voice. So they are the subject of governance, but rather than the master of the state, of the system. So this is then we probably ask, why did the state do so much, in extending the rights to the people? And actually the origin of all this policy was neoliberal. The state introduced universal medical care, universal pension scheme, etc., in order to facilitate the privatization of state-owned enterprises. So they say, sorry, your factory is being closed down, but we introduce a socialized, general welfare scheme, which of course is much worse than the previous system for you to join. But the good thing is that the new system is open to everyone. It's not exclusively for the employee of the state. And then it become, have its own momentum and become wider and wider. And of course, we must give credit to particular politicians as well. In 2003, and the time between 2003 and 2008 was the time all these welfare schemes were expanded very rapidly, and mainly because of the Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao. And some people say that because they are so weak, they can't do anything bigger, so they have to focus on this kind of nice things. This is a critique of them, but we think they did manage something very important, very important. So that was the older paradigm in which our industries and wage labor the old paradigm in which wage labor tame the multitudes, the laboring multitudes can no longer work. Actually, now state steps in directly to provide welfare in order to keep these people, you can say, just consent or keep them quiet. So this is the first thing we should probably pay attention to in China. The second thing, actually, if you look at these precarious workers' everyday experiences, then we may feel it difficult to call them proletariat. And actually, I think it will be more accurate to call them precarious proprietors. And of course, we say that the Chinese reform in the countryside create a large number of cheap labor and the proletariat that really fuel the rapid industrialization. This is true. If we look at, it is a hindsight, right? After the thing happened, it is an accurate description. But if you look at what the policymakers thought at that time, actually this is not their intention. And their intention was, again, quite neoliberal, and they believed that the market mechanism will work, and etc. And what they really did was to divide public asset and turn them to individual private asset. So therefore, reform can be understood as a process of a massive but a small-scale privatization program, right? I mean, when the state-owned enterprises were closed down, and also all the state housing are being privatized. Basically, if you live in the state-built unit, and then it will belong to you, and you can sell it, and etc. So people have this livelihood of living, and of course, in countryside, that is more obvious. The land was divided to each individual, and just 2 years ago, 2015, the Chinese government actually now required all the peasants to register, they require the local government to go to the countryside to remeasure all the land allotment that are given to each household, and to record it, and to hand out a certificate, official certificate, to make sure how large the land is under your name. Why do they do that? Why does the government do that? Again, the intention is very neoliberal, because they say, with this certificate, you can use your usufruct? Your usage, your use right, because the land does not belong to the individual household, the land is still collective. But your use right can be used as a security to apply for loan. And so what they want, actually the government wants, is to turn this peasant's use right of land into something tradable, to turn that into a financial product. And so they also encourage the peasants to sell their use land to other peasants. Therefore, you can have this large-scale economy in agricultural production, and therefore, the peasants who sell their use right can go to cities to work more properly, become citizens, etc. There is a whole it's very difficult to say. It's a progressive but neoliberal policies going on. But what I want to say is that they are given kind of properties, the properties. And the workers' main strategy, this precarious workers' main life goal is to accumulate assets. Even rural urban migrant workers, the lowest stratum in this precarious population, have managed to buy properties, small apartments, not in big cities, in like county seat cities, close to their village. They managed to do that. And they do have savings. And another thing we should not forget is that in China and in Asia in general, family relations is extremely important mechanisms for resource transfer. Laid off workers in North China, across China, but mainly in North China, because they have larger state-owned enterprises, were normally given quite a large sum of money when they were laid off, according to how many years they have worked in the state-owned enterprises. And they often use this money to invest some business, or they give this money to their children. So what I want to say is that the precarious populations, the family become important mechanisms of wealth accumulation and wealth transfer. So they are kind of precarious proprietors. But the thing I wanted to emphasize today, how does migration come into picture, is that these precarious, this society people do kind of voluntarily proletarianize themselves from time to time. And the typical example is that, for example, they go to Japan, go to South Korea, go to Singapore to work. And then I probably, if we want to visualize their life strategy, is like this. And most of the time, they will do all these kind of precarious, like a small business, work in the restaurants or work as a life insurance salesman. Yeah? And then if the money is running, the income is not good, and they will go to work overseas, or some work in China, as factory workers, as a proletariat. And the very long hours and very hard work. And then after that, after a few years, make some savings, and they will jump out of this factory work and return to this kind of unstable life as precarious proprietors. And then we ask, why do they do that? Why do they go kind of self-proletarianize themselves? Basically, three reasons, they told me. Number one is, of course, the wage is still higher. Working in Japan and Singapore is still much higher than their unstable income as a sales assistants in China. The number two, so income is predictable. If you work as factory workers, it is predictable, and you know that at the end of the month you will receive a certain amount of money. And the number three, I was quite surprised to hear, is that by working as a proletariat, as a factory workers, the money you earn will be the real money, the dry money. They call it the dry money. I asked, what does it mean by dry money? They said that because if you are working and living as a precarious proprietors in China, your expenditure will be quite high. You will go to karaoke, you have friends go to restaurant, you have all kinds of entertainments, right? So the money will go away very quickly. But if you go overseas to work as a factory workers, you work 12 hours a day. There's no expenditure. So all the money you earn will be the real dry money, and then you put in the pocket. And for me, this sounds very trivial, but for me it's quite important. In a way, this is what migration means for these people. Migration is not only changes the location of the workplace, but migration for them means they uproot themselves from this familiar social milieu and jump and put themselves in this pocket of a proletarian life in order to maximize saving and maximize the labor, right? So that is of course, we also have to think of this uneven development on the global scales, which makes the income level in some countries higher than others, and etc. So then 8 minutes, okay. Then I just probably come to my last point. What does this mean in the larger, at the more micro scale? I think that's probably, this is what I was thinking this morning. Probably this really urges us to rethink the idea that capitalism is about abstraction. That actually was my previous work about, this Indian global body shopping story, which is about the precarious labor, actually. These IT engineers, highly educated, skilled workers, whose job is mediated by these so-called body shops. They are like agencies, high-tech agencies, located in Australia, but serving American companies. And they source these workers from India, then to be shipped over to the US or Australia on short contract. And the point that I made there is that the capitalism is a process of disembedding and abstraction, and then how labor relations and human relations is reorganized in order to serve this process of capital abstraction and the flexibilization of production. Because this all the high-tech sector is dictated by NASDAQ, by stock market, and is highly flexible and highly abstract. But if you look at their life strategies and their behavior of the precarious proprietors in China, then what we see is that somehow capitalism stop stop abstracting social relations. Actually, they stop disembedding people. Now, what does it do? I mean, this is really related to Guy's thesis of rentier capitalism. Capitalism in the classical Marxist sense is really, you're homogenizing all the social relations, and you don't, because of money, this has a universal quality which will disregard, erase all these heterogeneities on ground, etc. So therefore you acquire the hegemonic positions. But now it is no longer working that way. No longer working in that way. You can see the the current system, how value is sucked, upward, right? Is really through this spatial as well as a temporal differentiations, right? These precarious, these society people sometimes work as, street vendors, etc., and sometimes jump into this pocket of deep proletarianization, and then they move back to their old life and in and out temporarily, and also in and out across the physical, spatial boundaries to other countries and etc. And actually my main part of ethnography is about all these intermediaries, about these recruiters, and how these recruiters create all kinds of exclusive boundaries in order to charge money, in order to charge fees from migrant workers. So what the intermediaries do is to prevent a universal open labor market from emerging. Right? So there really is anti-abstraction. But I want to say the entire capitalism seems now is working that way as well. And how, the main one-line summary of my work about these intermediaries is that how the intermediaries make money is how the state makes order. So the state actually governs these people, orders these current social relations through this kind of new boundaries, new exclusiveness, but often through the process of commercial transactions, not through administrative, rules imposed from above. It's different from the previous era. So that is what I was thinking. So therefore, probably, if we were thinking of what we should do, I don't know, but I think that again, in a conversation with Guy's work, certainly we should rethink the old laborist strategy, which is a European thing anyway, because the Chinese, the tradition is very different, the state of socialism is very different. But on the other hand, I think these pockets of proletarianization still deserve serious attention. Because in my view, value is still created by nothing but human labor. And if they don't produce all these things, this platform capitalism wouldn't exist. Amazon, Alibaba will have nothing to trade, nothing to sell or buy if there's no goods having been produced by human beings in the first place. But then the question is, why in our public imaginary as well as academic analysis, these pockets of proletarianization become so foggy or even invisible? Invisible. I think this is another trick of current capitalism, current era of capitalism. They are not only exploiting human labor, but also they are making this exploitation somehow very out of sight. Of course, it's partly through fragmentation and through outsourcing, all the kind of, rather thinking there is one single logic of capital through which it operates. Yeah. Thank you.